Alright, y'all. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 6 and we're going to focus on 6.1. So you're going to be able to define what a biome is. So before we can get into what biomes are, we need to review the levels of ecological organization. So remember, there are 6 levels. I had these above the board in the classroom. So individual, population, community, ecosystem, biome, and biosphere. So here's a picture that lets you see them a little bit easier. So remember, an individual is just one. It's the most simple level, so one deer. A population is 2 or more of the same species in the same place at the same time, so all the deer. The community is where we have all of the living things, so the deer, the skunks, the rabbits, the trees. So remember, all these 3 levels are just living things. Now, we're in ecosystem ecology and biome ecology. So now we're talking about the living and non-living things. So ecosystem is biotic and abiotic factors in an area, and then a biome is similar places all around the earth. And then the biosphere, of course, is the earth. So our key question, what is a biome? And what you're going to learn is that biomes are characterized by climates and then their plants and animals that are there. So let's talk about ecosystems. So an ecosystem is all of the living things and their physical environment. So this is a desert ecosystem. We can pick out the living things like cacti that live in a desert, but also we can describe the climate. It's dry. So when we talk about biomes, it's a group of those ecosystems. This was a desert ecosystem. Then the desert biome is all the deserts in the earth. So they share similar abiotic and biotic conditions. So the abiotic means the climate, biotic means plants and animals. Okay, so ecologists use similarities to classify biomes. So they're classified by climate and plant and animal life. First, when we talk about the climate, we're kind of talking about what are average conditions in an area like? What is the temperature usually going to be? What is the precipitation going to be over long periods? But we need to make sure that we know the difference between climate and weather. So weather is what do you get? So today, maybe the weather is going to be sunny and 75 or cold and snowy. That is the weather. But the climate is what is it usually going to be like? In Georgia, in April, it's usually this. So the weather tells me what I'm going to wear today. So the weather is what you get. The climate, what do you usually expect? So climate is just pretty general. Weather is specific. So for certain biomes and certain ecosystems, we can put them into something called a climatograph, and it just describes what is the climate like in a place. So it has the months of the year, and then it's going to tell you the average precipitation, and it's also going to tell you the temperature. So like in the grassland, you can see that in May that there's going to be a ton of rain, and then the temperature is going to be pretty warm as well. So, a summary of that. So biomes are classified by abiotic factors like the climate. So the climate is the average conditions. So what do you usually get in an area? The weather, day to day. What do you get today? The way that we look at that is a climatograph. So each biome has its own climatograph. So how do we do this? Temperature and rainfall are the 2 biggest influences on how we classify biomes. So here's a picture of all of the different biomes on the earth, and we're going to go into those more tomorrow. But you're going to typically see biomes that are at similar latitudes, and we'll talk more about that later as well. So this is what you're going to be making a diagram of, and I put the screenshot in Google Classroom. So there's 10 primary biomes. We classify them by temperature, so hot to cold, and then by precipitation. Are they dry with no rain, or are they wet with a lot of rain? So, for example, you can follow this graph. So, if it's really hot and it's really dry, that's going to be the desert. If it's really cold and it's really dry, that's going to be the tundra. If it's really hot and it's really wet, that's going to be the tropical rainforest. So tomorrow we're going to go further in to all of these biomes, but I just wanted you to know that the temperature and the precipitation were the most important things. Okay, so abiotic factors like temperature and precipitation and climate, those are important. But also we need to talk about the biotic factors. Most biomes have organisms that are adapted to live there. So for example, like a cacti is supposed to live in the desert. It's adapted to live there. It's probably not going to make it in the tropical rainforest, but you are going to see some variation. So, variation, such as like what lives there, is because of soil type, elevation, and wind. Like I might find some animals at the bottom of a mountain that I might not find at the top of a mountain. So, biomes and organisms. Again, you're going to see certain things that are going to live in a desert that aren't going to make it somewhere else. And they're going to be adapted to live there. Like the camel has the hump to store the water. Like cacti, plants like this, they're going to store water because there's not much water in the desert. So, natural selection, we've talked about that before. Things that are best suited to be in that biome are going to survive. Things that are not going to survive. So, for example, like a penguin, it's going to live in the tundra. It's going to live in the Arctic. It's not going to survive in the desert. So, natural selection is going to take place. So, some organisms can thrive in a lot of conditions, but most organisms have their little specialties that they can do. And then the last thing, net primary production. So, biologists classify based on weather and climate, so temperature and rainfall. They classify biomes based on what lives there, so plants and animals. And then also this thing called net primary production. So if you remember from the last chapter, producers make their own food. So basically what net primary production is, how much plant life do you have? So like the tropical rainforest is going to have a ton of plant life because of the rainfall and the temperature. And then places like the desert, they're not going to have many producers because the conditions are not right. Okay, so basically just a summary, just real quick. You don't have to worry about doing this assessment. So ecologists classify biomes based on biotic and abiotic conditions. So the abiotic conditions are weather and climate. So temperature and rainfall. We can see what those look like in climatographs. Then we can look at the things that actually live there. Those are the biotic factors. And then the last thing is primary production. So I know that's a little scattered, but I hope that this helps. I hope y'all have a good day, okay?